towards the research that I wanted to do. And it requires a large amount of data collection and analysis. And one of the things that happened while I was there was that I was able to get sort of pieces of the data that I needed. So I need data about, for example, how much different kinds of energy are produced and then exported and imported into each country. You can get that on an annual basis, and I could get snippets of it on a monthly basis. But what I found is we have more data on a monthly basis, but it's behind a massive paywall. And by a major paywall, I mean many tens of thousands of dollars. So, long story short, I figured out after many emails to different libraries at the United States Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., if I could go there, then I would get inside of the paywall. And so I could get the data that I needed. And could I really take it out? Yes, I could really download it and take it out. So I figured all that out from Christchurch in New Zealand, but I had to wait till I came back to the US and I took a day trip to DC and was able to get the data that I needed. So now I'm continuing the data processing in order to get all of the data now, these much more comprehensive data sets, kind of through the processes that we developed while I was in New Zealand, in order to understand the way that this virtual water moves. And then in the long run, what I'm really keen to do is to think about what are countries projecting and what are regions projecting will be their energy portfolio in 2050 or 2080 or sometime down the road. This particular website has projections, visions for the US and New Zealand completely off of fossil fuels. I think for New Zealand, they have some policies in place where that might be possible. I don't think there's any chance that by 2050, the US would be completely transitioned off fossil fuels. But nonetheless, it's an interesting thought study. And it's interesting to look at the ways that, that researchers project we will generate our electricity and our transportation fuels as well in the future. So in this case, we've got residential solar, large-scale commercial solar, concentrating solar, which is a different way of using solar energy and generating electricity, onshore and offshore wind, more solar, wave, geothermal, hydroelectric, and tidal turbines. Slightly different suite, if these were pie charts, you'd see New Zealand's hydroelectric is much higher. Right now their electricity generation is over 50% hydro. They just have some really nice lakes that are just naturally there, that have a good head between the lake outlet and the exiting area, and so they've developed a lot of that over the past 50 years with hydroelectric turbines. So when I think about what this could be in the future, then I think it becomes interesting to think about the water footprint of all of these different resources and how across different regions of the world, particularly water-scarce regions, how the implementation of some of these portfolios of energy will influence the water infrastructure and the water demands and potentially relieve some of the water demands in certain areas as we shift our energy portfolios. So with that, if you are interested in this kind of work, I would love to have any assistance. If any of you think that this is an interesting area of study, I'm still gathering data, especially as I think about kind of what's next. I want to make sure that I'm looking in all of the places for the best time-resolved data that I can find, and in particular, underrepresented countries, poorer countries, countries in conflict, tend to have fewer data resources, and so getting data from those areas is a bit trickier. Usually it requires some individual digging into each individual country rather than finding them in a global data set. And then there's still processing happening. So I'm using Python and pandas within Python to do the data processing. I'm also using Python for some of the figure generation, like that circular figure that I showed you early on, that was generated in Python. And then I haven't done any of this work yet in GIS, but I think there's some really interesting potential in making some maps that really demonstrate this movement of water, this embedded water embedded in the, this virtual water embedded in the energy commodities, and also perhaps developing a like an animation where we show that change over time, and then potentially show projections of what we anticipate that could look like in the future. So if those two computational resources are interesting to you, I'd be happy to get you on board, and I'm sure there's a lot that you could add that I haven't even considered in terms of the best ways to analyze the data and to visualize it. So that is that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh, you know what, there's one more thing. This is about you, though. So I think that Canterbury was a really fantastic place to spend a couple of months. New Zealand is, while very far away, it's a very accessible and comfortable place to visit. They speak English. The dollar is not our dollar, but you know, it's close enough. It's just generally a very welcoming, comfortable place to be. And Christchurch is the largest city on the South Island of New Zealand. I think it's the third largest city in New Zealand. And it's just, it's a comfortable place to be. They have nice public transport, they have a few good museums, the food is really great dining opportunities, but also very manageable. Like it's not like New York City, which I love New York City, but it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. I think that would be a challenging place to live. I did not find Christchurch to be a particularly challenging place to live. I found it quite inviting, really. So my point is that if you're interested in studying at the University of Canterbury, it's something that we could definitely consider. We don't have a formal study abroad program with them, but they have a huge suite of engineering courses, many of which would transfer here very smoothly, and so we could keep you on the right track. Their terms are slightly different from ours, so they're getting ready to start their first term of the year, of the academic year, because they just finished summer break. So right now it's hot or warm in New Zealand anyway, and they're on summer break and they're getting ready to finish up, and they'll be starting in a couple of weeks. So you would essentially go in like mid to late February, and it would last slightly longer than our, not longer, but it would be slightly later than our spring term would go. So I looked through their course offerings. This particular set is more focused in the natural resources engineering, which would be more relevant to our environmental engineers, but there's also mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, other kinds of engineering, and I'm sure that we could find a course load for you that would translate and transfer here with no problem. They have study abroad staff and offices that would help you apply for scholarship, that would help you get housing all set up and get integrated into their community. So one, I just pulled up, like, we can look at, one semester of your paradigm and then look at the courses that are offered at the same time when you thought you might want to go, and we can see what might work for you. I also found other St. Francis people. So what are the odds that 3 people who were associated with St. Francis would be in the same room in the same department in New Zealand, halfway across the world? So this guy's he's a math graduate and now is faculty in the engineering program, but he's definitely a math person, and so he actually did a back of the envelope, and it was like a 0.001% chance that we would all be in one place at the same time, coming from St. Francis. So this is my colleague back, and there I am towards the end of my sabbatical there. So if you're interested, please let me know. And now I really will be happy to take any questions. Stephen, yeah.
If the 2050 would be a possibility, let's say for the United States, what do you think the environmental impact would be for changing everything to eco-friendly, CO2-free energy production from the fossil fuels? Like, what do you think the environmental impact? Because if you're going to create hydro dams and stuff like that, as you said, you'll create these reservoirs that can affect the environment around those rivers and lakes. Do you think that there would be a big enough environmental impact that it would take longer just to reduce that impact, or do you think it'd be manageable enough where it still could be possible?
So for starters, I don't think we can get all of the energy infrastructure in the U.S. What are we at, 2024? In 25 years, all of the energy infrastructure in the U.S. converted off of fossil fuels, to anything, to solar, wind, hydro. There's just not enough time. There are, of course, drawbacks to other kinds of energy generation. It's not like there's some sort of panacea that is going to cause zero problems. Batteries are really important in a lot of the renewable energy technologies. Batteries have multiple problems. If they're not produced properly and if they're not cooled properly, they can catch on fire. If they are not, there are critical minerals associated with batteries and with a number of other technology pieces associated with all kinds of energy generation. And those critical minerals, what a critical mineral is a resource that's extracted from a place where there are very poor child labor laws, where there's very poor workers' protections, where the extraction does not give back to the community in equivalent economic value to the mineral itself. So those are not trivial matters. For me, my feeling about this whole, my opinion about this whole matter is that the first problem we need to address is global climate change. People will say to me, how can you justify driving an electric car when those batteries were probably harvested by like a kid who went and slept on the ground? Well, because that kid is going to have a lot of other problems besides just sleeping on the ground if we don't deal with climate change. The problems that are going to affect our communities, and especially impoverished communities, are going to be becoming more and more extreme as climate change gets exacerbated. Is that an excuse to just like take my battery out of my car when I'm done with it and chuck it in the river? No. But I'm going to do the best I can with the battery, but I'm going to get off the carbon because I think that's the most important thing. Things like hydro. I mean, let's go to nuclear. Nuclear is a carbon-free technology. When we use nuclear radiation to convert to electricity, we do not produce carbon dioxide. What's the problem with nuclear? It's dangerous. And the waste produced is very problematic. And we have yet to come up with a good solution for nuclear waste in the United States. Still, there are strategies to do nuclear. So there's these small modular nuclear reactors that are being developed. They are much tighter in terms of their safety protections because they're built in a factory instead of being built a giant building, a giant structure on site. They're small enough that they can be built in a factory, which allows the controls and the manufacturing to be much tighter. There's still risk. But to me, I would rather take those risks than the risks that we're taking with carbon in the atmosphere. Same thing with hydro. Solar and wind, I think that the risks start to really come down. The thing with carbon dioxide, you know, there's this idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Like, people really don't want wind turbines in their backyard. Some people don't like the way they look. Some people say they make a lot of noise. They're not totally quiet. They do, you know, often go up on like nice vistas because that's where the wind resource is really high, as it's coming across a cliff or something like that. But if you could see the CO2, you would take a wind turbine over that any day. And what we're finally seeing at a global level, everyone is starting to feel it and see it, is the consequence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So towards the whole climate change and everything that's going on in the world, with the U.S. and ours trying to push like the green ordeal and trying to switch over by a certain time period, what about us outsourcing pollution to other countries? And the fact that most countries like India and China are still coal-based and we're switching to a natural gas base and creating less pollution, why are we just worried about ourselves and not the world?
Yeah, that's a really valid point. Outsourcing our carbon footprint doesn't do anyone any good. Natural gas, by the way, while it has a lot of cleaner components, it can be burned more cleanly than coal, it does not change the fact that it's a carbon-based fuel and generates carbon dioxide. So it really doesn't get us closer to decarbonizing to manage climate change, just since that's the one you mentioned. But yeah, no, I would have zero patience for outsourcing. Like, that's not a solution.
And Charles, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are out of time today. QR codes for CES would be up front. Charles, let's see if we can